Shortly before the onset of the Dominion War, the Alpha Quadrant was thrown into chaos. The subversive actions of the founders, the leaders of the Dominion, instigated mistrust between the Federation and its neighbors. Treaties were dissolved, and open hostilities became commonplace. A few select commanders were chosen to lead the fight, to claim back territory that was lost by any means necessary. With the continuing threat of the Borg and the Dominion looming on the horizon, the galaxy now competes to gain a foothold for their civilizations.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Sins of a Solar Empire, or I should say, welcome to Star Trek Armada III. What we have here is a total conversion mod for Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion, found over there on ModDB. I'll put the link down there in the description. This is a total conversion mod for Sins of a Solar Empire Rebellion, as I said, that makes everything Star Trek. I'm playing the Federation here. And before I get this video underway, I just want to apologize. The reason being that I've been having a lot of issues with trying to record this, and unfortunately, this was the best I could do to salvage the footage. Unfortunately, there's no audio, so for this first episode, I will be recording separately after the in-game recording, and then hopefully I can have everything solved and figured out by the second episode. So everything is going to kind of be cut up here to make things a little interesting, a little faster. It's going to be a shorter episode than usual. I usually average about 30-40 minutes. This is only going to be about 27. But I just wanted to show off this mod, hopefully play an entire game. I'm playing as the Federation. We also have two Klingon factions, a Romulan faction, and a Borg faction in here. The Borg are supposed to be very difficult, so my hope is that I'll be able to kind of rally all the other nations together to fight against the Borg before everybody kind of starts infighting, because the Borg are supposed to be really tough. This completely retools the entire game. All of the ship icons are changed. The ship detail is all Federation. As we see, I'm zooming in on these ships here right now. You can just see how just really good looking these bulls are. These guys put a lot of work, I mean a lot of work into this game, and it really shows. It's one heck of a mod. I applaud them for it. It is a ton of fun. I'm a huge Trek guy myself, so if you've been a fan and also you will know that the last few years have not been very kind to the Star Trek franchise, but this is definitely a game, even though it's a mod, it's definitely a game that I think Trekkies everywhere can be proud of, and I definitely encourage anyone who's got Sins of a Solar Empire and is a Trek fan to try this game out. What we're seeing right here is combat. I set in my capital ship. I'm playing the capital ship in capital world victory mode, so if I lose my capital ship or my home world, I will be defeated. Right now I set my capital ship in to take a planet because there's only 2 ships here and I knew he could take it. But this is to showcase some of the combat, and the combat in this game is really neat. If you recall from Sins of a Solar Empire, usually what would happen is the ships would kind of move into position, and then they would sit there and they would fire at each other. I believe the modders have kind of patched in the Corvette AI from Rebellion. If you recall, the Corvettes are the really small ships from, not the fighters, but the smaller kind of frigate-looking ships from for each faction that would kind of fly in, bank out, shoot, and then fly back. But all of these ships now have that AI. So what happens is when you get these really large fights, you'll have ships moving all around, firing their phasers in every direction. If they are going after a certain particular ship, but another ship moves into their firing arc, they'll fire on that ship. Certain ships can only fire in front of them, while other ships can maybe fire forward and backwards. For example, this is the Galaxy class, which is my capital ship, and it can fire in many different directions, torpedoes. There we're seeing a few of my smaller ships in combat now. These are Miranda classes from early on in Star Trek history, but they serve as relatively the corvettes for the Federation faction. They're fast, they're small, they pack a good bit of punch in numbers. They're really used as primarily fleet escorts, but in swarm aspect, as I'm using them right here, they're pretty effective. But just look at, these are considered really small ships in this game. I want to point out these are some of the smallest ships in the game, and look just how much detail is on those ships. I can't wait to get into some of the larger ships and show those off for you guys. It's gonna look great. I'm really excited. I had wanted to play this mod earlier. As a matter of fact, I mentioned that when I was starting my Banished playthrough. This was the game that I was attempting to start. There were some problems with it, unfortunately, in the earlier iterations of this mod. Because it had so much happening, because there was so much graphic detail, because it's just such an awesome mod, it actually was incredibly taxing on the game. But it wouldn't be for a normal game. But the problem is the original creators, Stardock and Ironclad, when they made this game, for whatever reason, they didn't make it with 64-bit computers in mind. They only made it with 32-bit computers. I think the game is capped at using like 1 gig of RAM or 2 gigs of RAM, which is really kind of silly. So using all of the assets from this particular mod, it would really tax the game, and it would actually kind of eclipse the gig cap that it had on it, caused the game to crash a lot. Well, they officially released the full iteration, patch 1.0, about a month ago, and so now with that full kit, they released a little tool that allows you to adjust the gig cap on this game so that it'll allow you to play it on 64-bit systems with much more stability and a lot less bugginess, which has been great. It's been a great tool. These guys, it's a team of about 5 to 8 guys who are working on it, doing a bunch of different things, and they've really done a heck of a job. There is another Star Trek mod for Sins of a Solar Empire out there called Sacrifice of the Angels 2, I believe. It's a sequel to a mod for the Homeworld game that bore the same title. This is kind of a spiritual successor, in a way, to the Star Trek Armada franchise. It's 2 games that actually did exist. There were a Star Trek Armada 1 and 2. There were RTS games that were made back in the early 2000s that were decent. I wouldn't say there were anything groundbreaking. Obviously, not many people have heard of them. Many Trek fans probably have at least heard of one of the 2. They were a lot of fun. They had some problems with it, 1 and 2. 1 was balanced a lot better. 2 was really neat of all the factions it had in it, but both of them had their problems. This one is kind of hoping to build off of the progress that you saw in H games. The first one was a traditional RTS. The second one started to include stuff like colonizing planets to get population and whatnot. The developers of this mod kind of saw Sins of a Solar Empire as the next logical step that the franchise was going into, and that they felt it fit the mold very well. So they were hoping to make this mod as kind of a spiritual successor to the Star Trek Armada franchise. Obviously, it is not officially licensed. It's a mod. It's not an actual game. These guys aren't getting paid for it. It's a free download. As long as you have Sins of a Solar Empire, you can find it there on ModDB. But I definitely recommend everybody go pick this up. I'm not doing this Let's Play to promote it, however. If people see this and go and download it, great, because I want you to go support these guys. But really my goal is not to get their recognition or their thanks or anything like that. My goal is to just play this mod and maybe show it off, because I'm just, oh man, it's so much fun, man. Basically, because I'm a huge Star Trek guy, I like to know a lot about the Star Trek universe. This game is beautiful. Oh man, I can't even find a parallel for it. It's everything I wanted to see in a Star Trek game as far as just big battles go. There's definitely certain other types of Star Trek games out there that I'd like to see. Never really quite had a true exploration feel to a Star Trek game. It's always kind of been about combat, but that's another thing entirely, and I'm not going to go too far into that. We're focusing on this mod right here. As you can see, I'm playing the Federation. They are probably one of the more recognizable factions from the Star Trek universe. If you've never heard of Star Trek before, you are undoubtedly seen the Federation at some point. They're the big ships with the saucer at the front of it and big long tube-like struts at the end that are called warp nacelles. These are the humans of this world. They play a lot like the TEC from the original game. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure they are kind of using the TEC placeholder in terms of like technology trees and buildings and all that kind of stuff, and then they went through and edited everything and changed a bunch of stuff around. If you go into the tech trees, you'll see a lot of similarities to the TEC, but you'll also see some differences. It's not just a Star Trek paint, if you will, over the TEC. It's definitely its own thing, but you will notice some similarities. And that's obvious. That's to be expected. This is a mod of a game, so they're going to borrow a lot of assets from the game. But don't let that fool you. They did a lot of stuff. Almost all of the iconography in the tech trees is changed. I say almost all. It might be literally everything. All the icons. If you look down there in the bottom right, you'll see all these different buildings that aren't actually from the original game, because they took all these icons that they made, they took all these 3D models, all the stuff that the community has either made or they've made on their own. They've taken it all and compiled it together to make everything look really Star Trek-y. They use a lot of assets, I think, from Star Trek Online. Some of the music, I think I remember hearing them say that they used music from a lot of the... I've definitely heard some Star Trek Armada musics in there, but I think they've also used music from other games as well. Other Star Trek games, I should say. The factions in this, I'm not sure if I went over that. I'm going to go over that real quick. I'm the Federation. There is also the Klingons. I have 2 Klingon factions here. Klingons are probably the other more recognizable faction. If you're not familiar with Star Trek, you've probably heard of the word Klingons. It's kind of synonymous with anybody geeky or nerdy. They can speak Klingon and that kind of joke. There's also the Romulans, which are a really stealthy, kind of clandestine and isolationist faction. The Klingons being a much more aggressive and just they always like to take the fight to their enemies. They're very much about meat grinder and that kind of stuff. And then there's the Borg. If you're a Star Trek fan, you know the Borg well and true enough. And let me tell you, they are every bit as intimidating in this game as they rightly should be, before Voyager came along and made them into funny meatloaf that's really easily beaten. No, this is the true Borg. The Borg that will, with a single cube, wreck a good number of your ships before you can do anything. And I do believe that they have... It's interesting. They are a playable faction. All these factions are playable. I do believe that the AI version of the Borg get a particular kind of tech that is unique only to the AI, that allows them to be immensely powerful and a true threat in the game, that kind of encourages the other factions to unify and beat back the Borg. So I'm hoping that this game, the last couple times I've tried to play the Borg, was on the older iteration, and I got my butt beat. Supposedly the Borg have kind of been balanced out a little bit more to make them less just impossible, but still intimidating. They still wanted to keep with the intimidating idea of the Borg, while at the same time still making them not almost impossible to beat. As you can see, I'm actually neighboring the Borg. The Borg are those planets that are colonized over there on my right. And so my plan going into this game is to expand right quickly, hopefully bottle them up into a choke point, and defend the heck out of that lane while I try and build up my relation with the other factions. And hopefully, we can take the fight to the Borg as a collective. That's ironic, I use the word collective when that's the Borg word. But hopefully, as a unified galaxy, we can take the fight to the Borg, and then after the Borg are defeated, undoubtedly, everyone will kind of start to infight, and things will descend. So what I'm doing right now, as you know, I am very much, when it comes to these types of games, I'm going to be about, once again showing off just how impressive the graphics are. I'm very much about economics in this game, so I like to expand quickly, and that's probably at that point in the game when I'm going to be at my weakest, is when I've expanded out real quickly, and then at that point I start to really build up my economy and start to tech up. And then at that point, I'll start to steamroll out my ships and be able to take the fight to the enemy, who just cannot stop my production. That's the idea I'm hoping to go with in this game, is to once again get my economy up really good, get my ships together, and then take the fight to the enemy. So this is actually a particularly large map this is a 5-person map, but it's got almost, I think, 120, 100 to 150 planets. It's got a lot of planets on it. Very crowded map. A lot of fun. Hoping to get a few episodes out of this to show you guys. So what I'm doing is I don't think anybody's to my west, so I'm not as aggressive in expanding over there, if you will, as I am to expanding into my east, because the Borg are a huge threat and I definitely want to counter them quickly. Beyond that, things are very familiar. You're going to have your military and civilian tech centers that kind of increase into tiers. There is the culture structure that will expand your culture and help improve your allegiance. There is trade hubs, as always, that will automatically trade with one another and increase your trade route. There is refineries that will improve the efficiency of your extractors. There are, of course, extractors. There are the 2 types of shipyards, the one for your frigates and cruisers, and the other one for your capital ships. And of course, there is also the shipyard for your Titans. There are Titans in this game. Every faction has a Titan. I believe the Borg get a tactical Borg cube. The Federation gets a giant ship. I forget what. I think it might be the Centaur class. I'm sorry if I'm getting that wrong. It's from the Star Trek Online game. So anybody who's familiar with the Star Trek Online game will be familiar with the Titan that we see here. It's not really part of the finger quotes official lore. It's part of that game. The Romulans get the Scimitar class, the giant ship that is familiar from Star Trek Nemesis, the movie, that Picard went toe-to-toe with his clone with. And then the Klingons get a, I was about to say Negvar, but I don't think that's what it is. No, I think it's, if you're familiar with the Star Trek Armada II and 1 series, the Klingons got a ship that could self-destruct and would destroy everything in a system. And I think that is what the Klingons have as their Titan. I'm not sure if their AI has been programmed to use it correctly, but that is what it is. It's a small ship. It's not as impressive as the other Titans are externally, but when it flies into a system and detonates itself, it wipes everything. From my experience, I actually haven't seen it implemented in this game outside of doing it on a underwhelmingly crowded world. It wasn't on a fully fortified world. I'm curious to see if it will actually destroy star bases and other Titans. If it is, that could be a pretty powerful tool. What you're seeing here, engaging in combat. My plan in this series is to kind of be a little more quicker at it. If in my last Sins series, I was much more into explaining everything, what it was I was doing, what it was each of the, what trade centers do, what tech does, all that kind of stuff. For particular features in this, if there is anything different, I'll point it out. It does use some of the DLC for Sins of a Solar Empire that I didn't have on my last playthrough, which adds a couple new planets and something called galactic events, which can influence a lot of things. It can cause your culture to implode, which is bad. It can cause a galactic economic upturn or downturn, which will respectively greatly increase everyone's economic output or greatly decrease it. There's a lot of other events like giant things heading toward your planets and whatnot, a whole bunch of stuff. But when those things appear, when they happen, I'll talk about them. They happened a couple times during this episode, but unfortunately, because I had to cut everything up and because I lost all the sound, I wasn't able to talk about it here, or I did, but I lost the audio on it. So in the second episode, when I actually record it, and hopefully things don't go south, I will be able to show you some of the new things. There are some new planets. Actually, there's several new planets. Matter of fact, the one that my ships are flying to right now is one particular new planet that is kind of like the opposite of what ice planets are, that it has a great deal of metal extractors usually on it. But yeah, so this is the Star Trek Armada III. It's just a lot of fun. Combat in this can get really intense. When you get two large fleets going, it can get really impressive. I mean, if you recall from Sins of a Solar Empire, there were some impressive fights there, even though none of the ships are moving. Now imagine, you know, 2 or maybe even 3 really large fleets like this that are all moving, all firing phasers and torpedoes and banking and moving around and jostling for position. Things can get really cool. And at once or twice while recording this episode, I kind of let out little nerdy exclamations of glee because this game, what can I say? It makes me happy. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I've wanted a good Star Trek game for a good while, and unfortunately, all we've been getting have been the crappy games that have been made after the movies. But this one is going back to the original Star Trek roots, the ones that people who are actually Star Trek fans like, and it's done one heck of a job. So I tip my hat to these guys. They did one. I mean, I am a programmer from college. I'm definitely not a modder. I never really spent time in that, but I do know some of the struggles for having to deal with files and programming and all that kind of stuff, and I know that this was by no means a simple task. This is by no means an easy task on their part, but you know, from what they made it seem, and there's been interviews with them and some other videos done on this particular mod, but from what they've kind of shown, is this really was a labor of love for them, something that they just did because they wanted to and they thought it would be really cool to do. And I tell you what, it is great. It's great, guys. If you're listening, it's great. You know, there's always going to be room for improvements. It's definitely a indie developed mod, so you know, there's going to be glitches here and there. You're going to see some hiccups here and there, but I mean, in my opinion, this game looks better than the original game. The original Sins of a Solar Empire. The explosions are awesome. The graphic detail is great. The models are amazing. And look at that. That is like a small ship. Think of what the explosions look like for the big capital ships. All the phaser and torpedo fire. It's just an impressive looking game. Man, I can't say enough good things about it. So as we get into some of the later stages of the game, you'll be able to see more ships, more capital ships, larger battles, better tactics. I might go into some of the more advanced stuff. I'll probably geek out more than a few times about Star Trek lore, about how much bull it is if something happens according to the lore. Like this is a bunch of Miranda ships. I think I remember in the Dominion War there were actually a good bit of Miranda ships. The Miranda classes, the smaller ships flying around, are very old ships, but they've been in service for the Federation for a while. As a matter of fact, the Miranda class ships have been around since Kirk's time, which is at this point in Star Trek history about, I want to say 100, 150 years into the past. Probably in between that more than anything. So it's they've been in service for a while, but the Federation still uses them, I guess because they're cheap and because they just have a really good service life. And the Galaxy class, who can forget about the Galaxy class? That was that big ship there. That is what the Enterprise D was based off of from the Next Generation. Probably something a little more recognizable to someone of my age. I'm in my 20s. I grew up in the 90s. So that was when Star Trek The Next Generation kind of hit its zenith, was in the early 90s, and that was when I was a little kid. That's really the series that got me into Star Trek, was The Next Generation, and then after that I got into everything else. But watching The Next Generation and Baldhead Picard and awesome Captain do his thing, I loved it. I love Star Trek 2, or Star Wars 2, but Star Trek was my thing as a kid, and watched it so much. And so to see a game like this, where as a kid I always envisioned these large battles between all of these ships, it never really happened in that series. It did happen in it did happen in Deep Space Nine. Next Generation never really had that many big battles. I think at most they only had about 5 ships ever really engaged in combat. But you know, as a kid I had an overactive imagination. I had these little Micro Machine toys of Star Trek, and I'd always fly them around and make noises. I always wanted to see these big battles, and I didn't really get into Deep Space Nine when I was a kid because I had other things going on, and as a kid you have a million interests, and Star Trek kind of fell off at the time, and I'm getting back into Star Trek now. I'm trying to watch episodes of Deep Space Nine and get into the Dominion War and see some of the big battles they have there, big exciting battles, because I hear they're really good. But in the meantime, this game kind of is a fulfillment of a nostalgic wish of mine. But anyway, I think that's about all we have time for. Hopefully by episode 2, I will have more actual relevant stuff to discuss in terms of the content. But I just wanted to get this episode out there to make sure I got an episode out, because I know I've been really bad about that lately. And also because I just really want to show off this game. Anyways, guys, I want to thank you for watching. Please stay tuned for part 2, where we will be continuing the expansion of the Federation.